Hello, a huge welcome to all of you from all of us at One Future Collective. One Future Collective exists to advance social justice by catalyzing people power and just institutions. We're a feminist social purpose organization with a vision of a world built on social justice led by communities of care. We're based out of Mumbai, and we're so happy to have all of you here. To briefly situate today and the reason why we're all gathered here, um, this is a convening for practitioners working towards workplace justice to sort of get a sneak peek into findings from our study in search of feminist justice. As you all know, this is a study that critically examines how justice is currently understood and practiced in cases of workplace sexual harassment, specifically in the context of Indian formal workspaces. We will, of course, move on to talk about the study in much more detail as we go ahead. To some more context, while the PoSH Act has created an important legal framework, our research asks a deeper question of what does justice truly feel like in practice, and for whom is it functioning for and working. So today is an invitation for all of us to collectively explore that question and to imagine what a more care-centered and survivor-centered transformative approach to workplace justice could look like. Now, I'll just take a moment to briefly introduce all our panelists and then over to Vandita to moderate the discussion. Our speakers today are Dr. Anagha Sarpotdar, Kirthi, Jayakumar, Meghna Srinivas, and Zainab Patel, as I think I mentioned earlier as well. Dr. Anagha Sarpotdar is a researcher and practitioner specializing in workplace sexual harassment with a PhD from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, focusing on its social and legal dimensions. They're currently serving as the chairperson of the local committee, Mumbai City District, under the PoSH Act, and they bring extensive experience in redressal mechanisms and institutional practice. Their work spans policy engagement, including consultations with UN Women in India, multiple state agencies, as well as training and advisory across sectors. Dr. Anagha, thank you so much for joining us today. Next, we have Kirthi Jayakumar, who is a researcher at the Inclusive AI Lab and founder of Civitatem Resolutions, working at the intersection of emerging technologies, gender, and justice. I'm so sorry, just one second. Yeah, sorry. Working at the intersection of emerging technologies, gender, and justice, that the creator of Sahas, a tech-enabled platform supporting survivors of gender-based violence and enabling bystander intervention. Their work focuses on feminist foreign policy and women, peace, and security, with a strong emphasis on building survivor-centered, tech-enabled responses. They bring practice-oriented perspectives on how alternate and community-based mechanisms can expand access to justice beyond formal systems. Kirthi, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so glad to have you on board. We also have Meghna Srinivas with us, who is the founder and CEO of Trustin, a legal tech startup that enables end-to-end PoSH implementation through a secure, trauma-sensitive product program as well as policy approach. Their work focuses on using technology to strengthen workplace redressal systems and expand access to justice at scale. Inspired by their lived experience and the Me Too movement, they bring a practitioner's perspective on building safer, more accountable workplaces that go beyond just compliance. Meghna, thank you so much for joining us. And lastly, we have Zainab Patel with us. Zainab Patel is a transgender rights leader, DEI strategist, and social entrepreneur shaping inclusive systems across corporate India and grassroots communities. As the force behind initiatives like the Trans Cafe in Mumbai, and the Pride Business Network Foundation, she builds pathways for dignity, livelihoods, and visibility at scale. With extensive experience in designing diversity and inclusion frameworks for large-scale organizations, they bring a critical perspective on shifting corporate culture from performative compliance to meaningful structural accountability, which is something that we did speak of in detail during the findings presentation as well. And of course, we have Vandita, who will be a speaker, but also moderating the discussion for us. I know that was a very long-drawn introduction for everyone. I will also paste these bios in chat for people to just refer back to them. But yes, over to you, Vandita.
Thanks, Mansa, and what a fantastic panel. Thank you, everyone, for making time and agreeing to do this. We hope that we'll be able to use this panel to also disseminate the knowledge that you all share here today through social media and other digital platforms and transcribe it so that it can be accessed by many other people. I know that the knowledge in the room is immense, so I'm not going to take a lot of time. I'm going to move right into questions. Please feel free to be as expansive as you like. Share examples. If at some point you want us to stop recording something while you're sharing and restart, you can just let us know and we can pause and restart again. For everyone in the audience as well, if there are questions you have for the panel, you can hold on to them till the end, but I'm also happy for you to just keep adding them into chat and we'll pick them up towards the end of the panel. We're going to do some specific questions and then some questions for the full panel. So I'm going to start with Dr. Anagha. Dr. Anagha, you have engaged with the PoSH law and its implementation, both as a researcher and a practitioner, and very interestingly, as the chairperson of a local complaints committee as well. And our research suggests that while the PoSH Act has created a very strong legal architecture and some element of institutional protections, it's especially within one formal workplaces. And over time, its implementation seems to be weakening in practice. So from your point of view, I'd love to understand, when we say weakening of implementation, it means one thing, right? But what does it mean in terms of real cases? And what are the groups of workers that end up bearing the greatest cost of these gaps in implementation? You're on mute. Sorry, Dr. Anagha.
Yeah. So hi, everyone, and good morning. So Vandita and One Future Collective, thank you for this opportunity. I just, I have so much to say, and it's kind of difficult. But there are two things which I want to say in the beginning. How all of this has come. I think we need to go back to say 1997 or maybe even before 1997. Why and how all of this entire discourse on workplace sexual harassment started in India and how it kind of got shaped, because that is going to tell us what are the problems today. What was the idea behind uh, the Vishakha guidelines and the entire discussion which happened around workplace sexual harassment. That is one thing which so these are these are the 2 points. The second one and this first one are the 2 points, I think, on which I think the entire discussion should also kind of rest. The second point that I want to talk about is, while we are talking about survivor centered approach, while we are talking about trauma informed approach, we also need to understand that there is a inquiry framework under which everything happens, and this is about the redressal part. So how you know so understanding that inquiry framework, and how do we kind of what work is required within that inquiry framework to make it survivor friendly. I think this is the other point which I have. While I will kind of draw from both these points while I speak, I just want everyone to know that these are the primary points that I have in my mind. Now, because the implementation is weak, what is happening? See, one thing I want to say that while we see that there is an industry which has flourished, I can also see a lot of people who have absolutely no fear, who have absolutely no regard for the law. When I'm saying this, I am not saying that there is no implementation or they do not comply, but the manner in which they comply has absolutely no regard for the Indian law. And to put it simply, or to give an example, a lot of companies I have also seen, there is this whole thing on zero tolerance. So when we say zero tolerance, the understanding of zero tolerance in some of the Western countries and zero tolerance in India needs to be looked at. Also, there are a lot of there are many aspects in the law which may conflict with the global policies, and how they look at it. So that is also a point which I want to make, that there is no regard for the Indian law, there is no fear. We have to also understand that the appeal process is extremely complex under this particular act. Every state has notified certain appellate authorities, and the IC recommendations, conclusions, findings have to be challenged with those appellate authorities. So everyone knows that there is a lot of pendency of cases, and the entire process of appeal is also lengthy. So there is no fear, you know. There is no clarity on who does what in many states. Some states it may be there, but in many states there is no clarity on what is, who does what is the district officer supposed to do, what is the local committee supposed to do, where does a woman go if she does not want to get into litigation and wants to have some pre-litigation recourse. So the weakening of implementation is also not allowing women that information as to where they can go, if they do not want to get into litigation, because primarily litigation is seen as one of the ways out. uh, I also you know so while I'm so when I say something, 1 minute, there is a chat window is
You're just
blocking my
sharing
view.
your bio for others
Yeah.
and your LinkedIn. Yeah, please go ahead.
So while I also, I don't know what exactly it means, but I also want to talk about this whole thing of industry, the PoSH industry, and what kind of people are also functioning as external members. While the Act says that anyone who is familiar with sexual harassment can function as an external member, I think we need more clarity on that. This familiar with sexual harassment is open to interpretation of employers, and anyone and everyone can become an external member, because I can just read up on sexual harassment at workplace on the internet and say I'm familiar with familiar with the issue. Now, how does this weaken the already weak implementation? You have external members who have absolutely no understanding of how all of this started. What is the role of an external member within the internal committee? When all of this began, the external member was the appointment of an external member was recommended as a watchdog, as somebody who kind of monitors the fairness of the process, because there is a possibility that there could be pressure from the management. So the external member is there in the committee for the complainant, to support the complainant, to be there and tell her that, look, all the others may be a part of the organization, but I am someone who is going to be unbiased. I think that has shifted to external members, uh, you know, not really understanding their role, their responsibility, and the whole thing becoming mechanical and technical. There are also malpractices, which I would not want to, in the interest of time, I would not want to talk about the malpractices, but there are also many malpractices which are happening with respect to selection of external members, appointment of external members. The weakening of implementation is also leading to some false certifications, which I see. You know, there are organizations who are certifying people to become external members, certifying people to do inquiries, and they have absolutely, so there is no tie-up with the government or with an educational institution or a university, you know, which can actually, you know, build that knowledge base. So that is absolutely not there, and we have these certifications happening, which is further weakening, because there is this whole thing that, you know, we want somebody who is certified. So who certifies, and you know, what is the, what authority do they have to certify people? While, you know, and I go back to that point, that while we are coming with a feminist understanding that, you know, we need uh, a civil law, we need a law with focus on prevention, because not all women would want to uh, register a criminal case. So what happens to all of that understanding, you know, with this kind of a scenario? And who gets affected, you know, which group of women gets affected? I think that women who have no family support to fight cases, women who may lack resources for various reasons, are, I think, the most affected, because as I said, the IC is equivalent to God. And if you want to challenge this godly creature, you need to get into a lengthy litigation, which is expensive and cumbersome. So I think almost all women are not going to kind of, you know, be able to do that. So these were some of the points which are which were there at the top of my mind. But if there are further questions, you can, you know, maybe if you ask more questions, we can kind of expand. I can expand on it.
Thanks, Dr. Naga. I think you've brought up such incredible and important points. Also, things that I think over time we've just taken. I mean, I remember while doing this study where I just thought, oh, this is just how it is. And then I'm like, no, it doesn't just have to be like this. It comes from somewhere. Why are there like 50 certifications available? What is the, you know, authority behind it? How is this happening? And we've been guilty of doing the same. So I'm not saying that we haven't done it. How is this working out? Even in cases I have seen that come to us for like mental health support, ICs have done what they want according to how they see fit. Again, training gaps in like any sort of accountability for ICs, appeal systems being so complicated. So thanks for bringing a lot of that up. I will come back to you and others with one common question where I hope you'll bring up some more things. Zainab?
I just want to clarify one thing. See, when I'm talking about certification, I'm not talking about certificate of participation. You know, I'm talking about certifications which say that, you know, now you have the authority to become an external member, or you have the authority to conduct inquiry. I'm talking about those kind of problematic certifications, not certificate of participation, or you know, just that I have attended. Not those certifications.
No, thanks for bringing that up. Just recently, we were having a conversation with some folks who did the programs, but then even the participation certificate programs had zero assessment. So there are quite a few gaps across the training segment of this as well. Thanks for highlighting that. From what you shared a bit about like malpractices, I would say bad faith processes and policies within organizations. So Zainab, if I may come to you, breaking away from our set order, you know, you've done a lot of work with corporate DEI systems and with some of India's largest corporations. And you've also done it while navigating these spaces as a trans woman. Our research suggests that often these organizations are adopting the language of inclusion without structural changes or addressing underlying any power structure, right? So for you and in your experience, when you think of workplace redressals, what distinguishes DEI efforts that actually shift power and enable to an extent justice within the workplace, whereas those which are, reputation and risk management exercises primarily, or even now branding and marketing exercises?
Thank you, Vandita, for inviting me to come and speak. I had drafted a couple of points, but I'm also going to limit to let the audience also pose some questions. Um, and I was fortunate enough in the roles that I played as a DEI practitioner to also be the senior most member in the ICB, the presiding officer, but also design the systems. And of course, this is my own personal viewpoint. I don't think really we have a policy problem in India. We really have a power problem. Um, and for those people, especially women, legal activists, civil society activists, who've championed for the PoSH Act in becoming one of the most progressive, at least legal frameworks on paper. But I feel the moment it enters workspace, and I talk from the experience of being in the consulting workspace, in the alcobev industry, in the manufacturing space, and I've seen the good, bad, and ugly of all three. I feel that the moment this policy enters the workspace, it either gets negotiated with different people, just like Dr. Anagha mentioned, you know, and it often also walks the path to get diluted and often quietly gets buried under either the hierarchy of the organization or the fear or the reputation management. Vandita, you hit the nail on the head. And I'm saying this line with with extreme caution, but at the same time taking full responsibility that if you are not a full-time cisgender English-speaking employee in a formal office, you are actually standing outside the door of this justice system. So, for me, this is one of the biggest reality. So what we call as weak implementation is not really an accident. It is actually structural because what it does show up, and these are my own shortcomings also as being a DEI practitioner, leader within the organization, as a culture leader, is that internal committees are largely built in from the process of becoming technically compliant, but also, socio-culturally compromised. And in the two organizations which I last worked with, what I can say very confidently is survivors generally are subtly pushed towards informal resolution. Uh, one of the organizations that I worked in, which was a very toxic, hyper masculine space, they had a huge discussion whether a complaint should actually be considered under PoSH or no. So I guess there is so much, and the cases getting prolonged until the complainant actually exists a system altogether. So the real question that I feel is who pays the price of it? So for me, I see the contract workers, housekeeping staff, gig workers, queer and trans employee who already lack institutional legitimacy, and of course the young people in these organizations who are in the background told, think of your career before you file this. I don't want to absolutely mince my words while saying this, because for them and for a lot of people implementing PoSH is not really a protection, it is risk calculation. Amazingly, Vandita, over the last several years now, you see so many tech platforms coming up, tech platforms for complaint portals, dashboard, anonymous reporting tools. But with all honesty, I feel that most of these systems, if not all, are actually designed to protect the organization, not the survivor. So your technology today tracks complaints, standardizes timelines, generates audit trails, which is good from a trail perspective, but it doesn't necessarily hold those in power accountable. It doesn't absolutely understand trauma, and it doesn't prevent retaliation. And my personal view is that while I totally am for AI based and other solutions, software solutions, we cannot really automate justice where the system itself is biased. So this is also something that I feel. And since you asked me my specific viewpoint about DEI versus real accountability, and I'm saying real because there is a need to call out real accountability. So a lot of organizations speak the extremely right language. One of the last organizations I worked with, I was blown away by the language that they used in the inception, because it sounded too good to be true. But the uncomfortable truth is that DEI, without the redistribution of power, especially within these frameworks, can tell you it's all about only about branding. So you have token DEI, which will bring you your trainings and your posters and the certification, most of it which are not even validated. As Dr. Anagha rightly pointed out, there are so many people offering certification, but no one is, and because people use it for the tokenistic value that they bring in, the celebration of diversity, and also a lot of things being optics driven. But the real transformative DI requires you to structurally redesign the system. Like, for example, how while the PoSH Act is women centric, what do you do to people of other genders, of other experiences? What are the pathways for mitigation, for grievance redressal? And how do you also protect dissent in the organization? And what is the accountability driven mechanism? um, Especially because I worked with the UN. I don't want to mention the UN agency's name in the picture, where the complaint was filed against the head of the agency because that person kissed someone on the cheek, and it took them so long to even decide how to pursue on the case, etc., so on and so forth. And all of this, underlines one basic thing. While we talk about trust, etc., we've actually forgot that care is a system that you need to build. And survivors not having to repeat their stories 5 times or 50 times or 500 times to just get to the core. And what do you look at? Financial and job security and the mental health support, which is supposed to be ongoing, and also protection from subtle retaliation, both from the HR, the team, etc., so on and so forth, because retaliation is a reality, and we cannot really escape for it. So with this, I'll probably pause, Vandita, but happy to take on more questions later on.
Thank you so much, Anam. There's also a message in chat which I strongly agree with. There's this line you said, technically compliant but socio-culturally compromised. I think that really hits the nail on, I think, where we've come with the PoSH law. We've gotten so good at doing the process that we've forgotten that there are people behind this process, and people cannot be put into buckets and cannot be automated. So exactly what you said. Thanks for those insights. And also thanks for calling out the need for real accountability and being so honest and honestly direct about where this issue lies and what really needs to change. Thank you for that. Kirthi, maybe I will come to you next. Because a lot of what Zainab said towards the end was also around care infrastructure and thinking of trauma-informed approaches. And your work with bystander intervention, the Sahas app, it's interesting that it's technology built for survivors, right? And that, as we're hearing now, is very rare. It's built for them outside formal organizational structures. So from your experience, could you shed a little bit of light on, one, what are the gaps in your opinion in terms of redressal mechanisms for those that are outside formal systems? And how do you think feminist justice approaches could extend care and accountability? And if you want to bring it in, perhaps even from the technology, app, AI lens that Zainab brought in, how is your work different, or how do you think the work can be done differently?
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for this space to, I think, reflect rather than answer. So I'll just start with a note saying that some of these are still heavily informed by the view from my seat at the table. They are not absolute, so please take them with a pinch of salt or a ladle of salt, whatever feels right. And question it, please question it if it must be from your side. So just going back to what you started with, Vandita, the whole idea of embedding a feminist approach or feminist justice, I want to start by prefacing with the fact that we have multiple feminisms on this planet that do not necessarily reconcile. And within those feminisms, there are also multiple practices of power that go unnoticed. So we cannot be comforted in the notion that we've applied a feminist justice approach and be happy with it. We've got to be willing to interrogate all of the impacts, all of the systemic and structural violences we have embedded in it. So that was my starting point, really. And also part of it was just my own journey as somebody navigating multiple systems and trying to find recourse. I faced sexual harassment at the hands of members of the upper echelons of the judiciary, people who were basically vanguards of the law, as it were. They were supposed to protect the law, at least on paper. But what happens when they have so much power? What happens when you are but a student? What happens when you are a young woman for the system? And what happens when you dare to open up and speak out? You do not have institutional apparatuses. I can tell you for a fact that, but this was way back in 2010. Yes, I'm a fossil for anyone who's calculating. But in 2010, this apparatus was entirely lacking. This was before the PoSH law, but the Vishaka judgment was still there. The Vishaka judgment was a product of judicial activism, and the authorities that were busy doing what they were doing were also calling themselves the vehicles of this judicial activism. 2013 came and went, and I will not, again, to borrow the words of Zainab, I will not mince my words. I am not optimistic about the PoSH legislation. Having been a lawyer, having practiced the law, take that with a pinch of salt as well, I will still say that the law is a colonial tool and is not going to give us justice. It is not. It's just a way to enforce compliance. And those that are willing to comply will bend backwards to comply, even if it is at a personal cost. And those that won't will keep power alive. And that's what the law is allowing you to do. The status quo is maintained. So when that apparatus came then in 2013, there was nothing different. I was speaking to young folks who were working in the institutional side, who were facing everything from snide remarks to outright molestation, and they simply had nowhere to go. This is the judiciary we're talking about. So if within the judiciary you don't have this apparatus, if within our homes, which are also workplaces for everybody in our employ, we don't have this apparatus, what do we say of people who are living the whole world as a workplace, effectively? The only time they are not working is when they are asleep, which is also when they are vulnerable, right? So all of those thoughts really informed the way I would go about creating this tool. And for me, it was just a case of, I need help. Where can I find it without selling my data, without outing my identity, without having to put my trust in another human being that this has happened to me? I just need help. I know this is what has happened to me, and I know this is the kind of help I want. So again, this solution, though quote unquote feminist, started with some sort of an assumption of power and privilege on part of the user, that they were aware of their rights, that they could access this tool. And because I speak in English, I created a tool that also spoke in English. So again, that embedded that normalized sense of power dynamic that I have internalized in my everyday and embedded it in that. So it was not a perfect solution. But I can tell you the two things that I feel like I did decently and I'm happy to share is A, not collecting any data. So this tool was created using what was called software development kits, and not there was no code that embedded behavioral marking, behavioral tracking of any sort. So the SDKs that I used were basically things that I modified using Web3 Schools, very, very sadly coded app. I'm fully willing to admit that it was basically me being a carpenter on an electronic device. But essentially, that helped because nobody was asked to share any information about themselves. You came into the app, the fact that you accessed it was only made aware if you reached out to me to say, hey, I looked at this app, thank you for the help. Otherwise, I had no idea if you used it. The second thing that I thought went all right or went well was the creation of a rules-based chatbot. So this was using Dialogflow on Google, which at the time, I don't know if things have changed and Meghna can speak to this better than me. At the time, it was not receiving any data from you. If you went in there, you clicked on a button, and then you got the information you needed. That was how rules-based it was. So I started documenting specific categories of help. So when you opened up the chatbot, it would say, do you want to seek help by category or by region? Just click what you want, and then the answers come in. So I felt like those two pieces maybe foreshadowed a potential future where data extraction was a real thing and sort of prevented that from happening. But aside from that, I cannot tell you that there was anything good or positive or solutionist about my tool. It was just one more resource because I do not want to endorse the idea of techno-solutionism. We are terrible as a species, and what we create carries that terrible side of ours very, very blatantly within it. So even if I make a case for the human in the loop, I'm also conscious of the fact that the human itself is deeply flawed, is definitely imbued with power that they may or may not be willing to reflect on. But yeah, that's what I can draw from my journey looking back. And I think when we are willing to use labels, whatever that might be, whether that's feminist justice, whether that's queer justice, we should be open to interrogating what we embed into those labels. What is our positionality when we take this up? And are we willing to be held accountable to the standards that we are setting up for the tools we create or for ourselves in the process?
Thank you so much, Kirthi. A lot of the technical part I have noted to look up later, but it's very cool that even when it was being built, there was this much thought. And I especially, like, I made a note of what you shared about, like what are we embedding into these systems just by the fact that we are the ones, I'm speaking of the folks here with a certain amount of privilege, designing some of these systems, these frameworks, these technical solutions. And then when push comes to shove, if we are going to be held accountable for it, are we open to it? Or are these generally standards and benchmarks that we think the world must aspire for, but not us? Because like you said, there are different feminisms. And if someone else's feminism asks me, you've missed on this, or you've done, you've caused harm through this, am I open to being held accountable? That's a beautiful question. And that's something I'm going to think about because I don't think I have the answer yet. But thanks for bringing that into the space. Meghna, I think even with the nudge from Kirthi, and I'm going to come to you with this question, a lot of it focuses on technology because your work integrates technology with PoSH compliance mechanisms and has till date reached, to my understanding, above 37,000 users across 120 organizations. That's a massive number. So it'd be really great to understand if you could briefly talk to us also about the integration of technology that Trustin leverages. And where do you see this tech-enabled PoSH system still falling short, or even like where it is succeeding, right, in delivering feminist survivor-centered justice beyond compliance? To my knowledge, Trustin is also one of the few organizations that offer something for survivors to sort of accompany them. So if you could share a little bit of that, that would be great as well.
All right. So hello, everyone. Wonderful to be here. So my name is Meghna, and I'm the founder of Trustin. I've been working in this space for 7 years now. As Kirthi and Vandita and others have mentioned, we started our life as a product company, right? So Trustin Enterprise was here with a chatbot and a workflow to take cases end to end. I think Zainab also pointed this out, where we have seen in the past few years there are examples and non-examples, because when you are, automating an inefficient system, then you're amplifying those inefficiencies, right? And as Kirthi mentioned, a lot of those inefficiencies are coming from the shadow side of human nature, coming from power differentials that are completely unaddressed, and coming from the lack of multilingual or intersectional approaches, right? So for us, it was definitely learning by doing. So it was fingers burned, lessons learned in these last 7 years. Right now, as Vandita said, we do have a lot of clients who are using the app. And some of the trends we have seen, the first thing we could not really deny is that caste and a lot of other positionalities are very, correlated with gendered violence, right? Whether it's sexual harassment or gender discrimination or other forms of gendered harm. And I think this is something that a lot of employers have difficulty wrapping their minds around, right? Because even now, when we do a lot of intersectional PoSH trainings, what we're told is, okay, you can talk about all these other things. You talk about bias, you talk about conditioning, but please don't talk about caste, because we are a, caste blind company. We don't believe in caste, is what some people said. It's not like Santa Claus. Like, unfortunately, these hierarchies exist whether you believe in them or not. So we have been slowly trying to push the envelope on that conversation, but I think I'm just starting from where automation falls short. This is a big one, not taking intersectional approaches into mind. I think for us, because we were working in a lot of rural based companies as well, that's when we saw that multilingualism was very important. So we plugged into the Bhashini ecosystem. So now both PoSHPal and Trustin Enterprise are available in 12 different Indian languages. So I think that also has shown us how much of understanding, internalizing, really claiming agency and space depends on language as well. Your understanding of harm is shaped by language and what words your language might or might not provide. So that's been a huge eye opener as well. And honestly, the thing with technological tools, Vandita, is it's only as good as the people using them. It's only as effective as the context in which it's being used, right? So in some of our best case scenarios, we might have had 100% compliant process, right? But then at the end of it, I think Zainab spoke to this, we will see both the complainant and respondent leave, right? Because small things like really maintaining confidentiality, ensuring that there's no culture where these people are made to feel othered, right? That for me was not a measure of success. So you've had a 100% compliant process, you've reported it to a district officer, but it's still so unsafe that your employees leave. And many times, especially, if you are a non-man and you might not have received a fair process or a fair judgment, you never go back into full-time employment. That's what some of our, data has shown. So I think it has long-reaching ramifications. We cannot ask why India has such a poor labor force participation rate without asking what are workplaces and the world of work doing to make themselves safer and more inclusive, right? The second thing is sometimes with leadership as well, even with the best of intention, and this is one part of the PoSH Act that I love, it says impact over intent, right? What matters the impact on the person receiving the behavior, not the intent of the person initiating the behavior. So sometimes I have heard founders and presiding officers say things to survivors like, you better report this, serial predator who's a very famous senior person in the government, because if you don't and he goes and harasses any other young girls, that will be on you, right? So again, I was like, this cannot be the best case scenario for us, right? And I think now we've been looking a lot more at restorative justice approaches, looking at restorative practices to proactively have the finger on your pulse of culture. You don't have to wait for it to become a case, to become misconduct, to become sexual harassment, because that leaves a lasting scar, right? A lot of these patterns can be picked up. That is where I can segue into what is positive about technology, right? So when you're sitting as the head of a huge MNC and you're looking at patterns across your different locations, we have also seen with some of our long-standing clients that certain locations, there might be certain types of sexual violence that is more normalized, right? So then you can actually tailor your interventions, your awareness sessions to that, right? So for example, and just to, I will maybe reference a bit of explicit thing, like if we are going into rural India, right, perhaps in the north, right, where we see a huge prevalence of very explicit swear words used in a affectionate way, quote unquote, right? We will actually say in our training, Ma Behan Galis are also sexual harassment. So just don't use them. They are not for emphasis, they are sexual harassment. And then it really takes some time to sink in, right? But because of the patterns that we have seen in the cases, we can actually implement that. So pattern matching and solving for the patterns is something where I think tech can help. I think, of course, that multilingual aspect, it would be so difficult for a person to fluently support survivors in, double-digit languages. But that's also something that tech has really solved for and continues to solve for. I think another big thing, I am honestly, on the fence about how AI can be used for this, because I agree with Kirthi that the potential for misuse is far higher than just a workflow automation app, right? So I think it would be in everybody's best interest to keep employee data, to keep even company patterns away from that as far as possible, if you can, like keep it on your own servers, keep it for your internal training purposes and all of that. But I think it could slowly grow into hub and spoke models where you're creating ecosystems of support for survivors. Like I said, with contextualized experts, with local resources. What we're not understanding is that even when I'm talking to perhaps a trauma therapist, right, I'm taking 3 to 6 months that the PoSH Act allows me to come forward with a complaint. I always tell my ICs, right, that for you, this might be one of 10 cases that you'll see in your 3-year tenure. But for a survivor or, a respondent, this is probably the only case that changes the course of their life and how they see a lot of situations going forward, right? So always dealing with that sort of delicacy, with that trauma sensitivity, I think that's something that we've built our app with trauma therapists, right? So a lot of our committees have said that those nudges were helpful because the app sort of keeps telling you, okay, keep some tissues in the room. Please have some drinking water near the person who's presenting. Remember that they can bring somebody if they need some moral support, right? The PoSH law doesn't really stop you from having somebody just accompany you, for example, a loved one. So I think just making sure that we center humanity also in design. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. And I think we need to look beyond the financial and legal aspects, which are just, negative forcing functions. And we can be more proactive and positive about designing for the humans. And I think that is something that could really elevate the quality of conversations. I think, unlike many people here, I am a non-lawyer. I don't know why, but no offense, Kirthi and any other lawyers, but lawyers love to remind me that I'm a non-lawyer, right? So I think what we have to also empathize with is that committees, you're asking a group of non-lawyers to juggle some, very stressful piece on top of their full-time job. They're not getting paid for it, right? Often they're in the firing line because nobody thinks they're doing a good job. So I think this is where technology, at least procedurally, documentation-wise, can ease some of that additional burden that they're carrying, right? And let's do that well. And once we're able to say that, okay, we have ticked off this box, then we can perhaps also make sure that we're filling in some of these mindset shifts. Yeah.
Thank you, Meghna. I think that was a really powerful insight. And I also love that you brought out a lot of the positives of using tech, especially what you shared, even though, you mentioned language integration is difficult. Tech does make it much easier to do it and to ensure that a lot more people can access a system that otherwise they would have been completely out of. Even the pattern recognition part and how that integrates into training and awareness building and really locally contextualizing the work is super important. I do want to stress upon one point you said about ICs, mainly non-lawyers. I think that is such an important point to keep in mind because sometimes I think, especially when I see external members who are lawyers, even our focus on compliance can often come at the cost of being people because that's what's drilled into us through our years, right? To be compliant, to do the due diligence, to make sure we're not missing out on the legal aspect. But sometimes, you take that risk if it means being a person in that room and making sure a survivor is heard, felt, seen, or just taken care of. Right. Yeah. So thanks really for bringing that up. I think something that you said in the beginning is going to go into one of our, I'm sure, quotes is that, if you're automating an inefficient system, then you're automating those inefficiencies. And that is sometimes the burden of a product that's building that out as well. Thanks for bringing that in. Given time, I'm going to ask one question to everybody. We've discussed how the PoSH law provides a legal redressal framework, etc. Right? But there is a clear gap in how justice is delivered or experienced. I'm very curious to hear from everyone here. What do you think is the biggest barrier to bridging this gap? We've discussed the problem. We've said this is a gap, this is a barrier. How do we bridge it? What needs to change for that to be bridged? And do you think there is a strategic opportunity somewhere for us to move the redressal systems towards being maybe slightly more survivor-centric, slightly more feminist, if not entirely? I'm going to go maybe in the same order as the first questions. So Dr. Anagha, I'll come back to you. Please also feel free, everybody, to take this time to share something. So it's a question I like to ask, but we're low on time is, what is something you wish someone asked you? That you know this and you want to share this, but nobody ever asked that question about PoSH. So if there is something on those lines that you'd like to share, please feel free to. Dr. Anagha, over to you.
I think, I just want to highlight a fundamental thing about language. When we are talking about lived experiences of women and acknowledging that sexual harassment at workplace is a form of violence against women, and that is why we are talking about redressal, we are talking about justice. Let's also look at the language that we are using. When we use the word PoSH, I think we are, what are we trying to do? Because I believe, and I never use the word PoSH for the simple reason that I do not want to, number one, talk only about prevention, because I think that puts us in a comfort zone. That sexual harassment is only about, quote unquote, prevention, and just dishing out these prevention programs, prevention sessions. The second reason why I think this word PoSH is extremely problematic is also because it was coined by people who do not want to use the word sexual harassment, who are themselves not comfortable using the word sexual harassment. And by doing that, we are also then kind of denying its existence, because we constantly harp on this word posh, 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 and not say that, look, this is sexual harassment at workplace happening to women. So I think we start from there, when we say that it is a case of sexual harassment, because, I see people using the term posh case. I don't know what is a posh case, It's a case of sexual harassment, not posh case. So, there is a lot which I can talk about, because, my work started in 2005. And, Vandita, when you say that, I wish, you all may wish somebody would have asked you. I just want to say this, this is besides the point, that my work started in 2005 when there was no law. And in 2025, I finished 20 years of research and practice on workplace sexual harassment. And that is where I'm coming from, that, it's only in 2013, when the act came into existence, this posh business started. This posh term was not there before that. And I think one of the biggest shifts towards, make, again, excuse me for using this term, but to make it more feminist, is to stop using this word posh and say prevention of sexual harassment, redress of sexual harassment case, and just acknowledge that sexual harassment exists at our workplaces and women are disproportionately affected by sexual harassment. And I would stop here, because there is a lot that we can do, but I don't think, I want to get into the nuances of the, the inquiry process and things like that. But I think this one thing also can make a huge difference.
Thanks, Dr. Anagha. I think there's so much power in really naming something as what it is and not a sanitized abbreviation that makes all of us feel a little easier talking about it. I'm also uplifting a comment from chat which says, it's going the same direction of Me Too, right? Like, oh, you will be Me Too if you do this, and making it a joke, a term you use as a joke. The same happening to Posh, saying, Posh case ho jayega. It would be very different to say sexual harassment case ho jayega. Like, there'll be a sexual harassment case against you. The power of the language.
I'll do posh against you. There is a posh against me, and I'm like, what is posh against me? I mean, see, anyway, even if you go by prevention of sexual harassment, what is prevention of sexual harassment against me? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. Anyway, thank you.
No, definitely, strongly agree. Thanks, Dr. Anagha. Zainab, over to you.
So my question is something that I've always been struggling with, and I think I would just leave my question as a statement, and it doesn't need any more explanation. I think it speaks for himself. If a complaint is filed against your highest performing, most senior leader, someone who's critical to your organization, revenue, or reputation, will your organization still choose justice over business continuity? That is the question and the statement.
Thank you, Zainab. I'm going to let everyone sit with that question for a bit. It's such a clarifying question because all of us know the answer. The moment you ask the question, I think all of us know what the answer is. And that speaks to if it really works or doesn't. Thank you. Kirthi, I'll head over to you.
I think the one thing that should change is a compliance focus to a bit more community governance focus. Because if you're complying with something, you're finding every jugaad there is to check a box. You've fulfilled what needs to be fulfilled on paper. You could be the polar opposite in practice and there's no accountability for it. But instead, if you took this apparatus and said, we have this policy, we have this law, and all of you are this workforce, all of you, it's not just women, all of you are this workforce. what does bringing it to life mean in ways that acknowledge your agency, that acknowledge your journeys, that acknowledge how power is felt by you within this organization, and what are we as an organization that's stewarding this entire thing going to do about it? It can't become one more floating PDF on the intranet. It's got to be something responsive that becomes something useful in action, right? I'm thinking also, just by way of a metaphor, I'm thinking of the Chipko movement. You had forest laws that were supposed to protect the forests. What was happening? Everything that the British did, now an elite Indian group was doing. And the law was actually servicing the ones in power. But how did they protect their space? They did not look at it with a governance framework lens. They did not go to court. They did not file a petition. They had their informal complaints. They tried. It wasn't heard. They literally went and hugged trees. That's community governance at its finest. This was their definition of how they would protect their means of sustenance, their means of existence, their relationship with their resources. It was not an asset. It was something that they were very deeply aligned with in terms of sentience. The environment is not just one more thing they extracted from. So if we can learn from that, if we can stop thinking that governance comes only from law and policy and start becoming creative about recognizing whose agency we're trying to support, then we are moving away from, like Dr. Anagha said, these limiting ideas of just prevention alone, treating the whole idea as a punchline in a joke, or even just feeling, I don't know, incapacitated sometimes. Because I do know of a lot of groups that want to do the right thing, but because this whole thing is couched in a document with 25 clauses and then a law backing it, there's overwhelm. There's this significant disconnect saying, whatever I do, I'm going to do the wrong thing. And I'm going to hurt someone, either the law or somebody in the organization. So instead, if we make all of ourselves agents of co-creating that space and being accountable to each other, things can be a lot different. Not perfect, a lot different, and perhaps better than what we have now.
Thanks for that, Kirthi. Really resonate with the community governance framework, but also what you said towards the end, that even sometimes when you want to do something differently, because you're so bogged down by so much compliance, if we don't do the compliance, what will happen? I think our risk-taking appetite towards imagining and doing things differently, even if it were to fail, just sort of goes away. Until some people don't sort of do a bit of trial and error, we will never see what community governance models are possible. A quick note, during the research, there were organizations that had set up community governance or oversight bodies for the PoSH processes. There were small organizations that were less than even 10 employees. But what they had done is they had set up an entirely external committee made up of the community they served. It was a non-profit. So even for within, for their staff, they had set up an entirely external PoSH committee. Now, these are things that even when we document, we don't document with name because they're technically not in compliance with the law. But it has worked and served their people much more than what the legal committee would have been possible, would have possibly done. So I think some of those examples through this process have also just been very nice to read about and see that it's possible. Just someone has to say, we're going to try, we'll see what happens. Yeah. Meghna, over to you for your final words.
I think I would definitely see it as a top-bottom two-pronged approach, right? So from the top, I definitely echo what you said, Vandita. We need a certification body which needs to not just upskill external members in very, important trauma-sensitive pieces. Like, yes, you might be a trained lawyer, so you know questions of fact, you know questions of law, but do you know exactly how a human body goes into tonic immobility when sexual harassment or sexual assault happens, right? That's a very critical context that you require before you can sit on a committee and advise the committee as an external devil's advocate. So I think both in mental health and in sexual harassment and safety, with the lack of some kind of central, for CA, CFAs, you have to pass the exam, you have to keep re-registering and sort of licensing yourself. That is a critical gap that's being missed here. I'm sorry to say it, but I was just ranting to a friend the other day and I said, the way tech bros just start podcasts, anybody is just like, okay, you know what? PoSH consulting is going to be my side gig, right? So, I mean, it's just not that simplistic. And these are people's lives and mental health at stake. I think from the bottom up, I deeply echo what Kirthi has been saying and, of course, what the framework captures, right? Care and community are such critical aspects of this that are being completely sidelined. And I'm not sure how we can navigate this given the confidentiality aspect. right? And our need to stop putting more secondary trauma. But I believe when the civil code said that, hey, your PoSH committee will have the powers of a civil court, it was not just to decongest the criminal justice system, it was also so that people would be held in a contextual and safe space within their organizations. Human beings are communal creatures, right? When employees, whether a survivor or the accused, when they get othered, that's why we have those exits and we have that lasting PTSD that comes with this entire process. So I'm also wondering how we can have safer containers for this entire process to play out.
Thanks for that. I also really appreciate the framing of we need two parallel threads of processes and not necessarily one to the exclusion of the other. Also to sort of ensure that there are interim protections while some of the other paths are figured out, right? Because some of the more messier, more human-centered things will take more time. But can we still have protections and systems while we reach a place where we feel comfortable with some of these alternative mechanisms as well? Thanks for bringing that up. And also uplifting from Kirthi in chat, but also otherwise, the powers of the civil court, both for ICs in practice and also how civil courts themselves have been functioning, hasn't been the best thing. I don't think it's within organizations also fully realized that what does it mean to have the power of the civil court. And I'm going to go back to something Dr. Anagha said, and one of my team members sent it in quotes to us saying, ICs behave like gods. And it is unfortunate that that has become a true practice, even when they think they're doing it in best interest of survivors. It is done in a manner that no longer thinks about justice, but thinks about what they think serves justice. Yes. Thank you, everyone. You all have been so brilliant. I have an entire 2 pages of notes, although we're recording. I couldn't stop myself from putting down thoughts of what all of you were sharing. We will perhaps publish some of this into a blog with your names, photos, and we'll run it past you. But just every line that each person has shared has been an insight on this panel. I think you've also brought in very different perspectives, community perspectives, tech, DEI, but just very, very different perspectives that have come together and aligned on some core things that we need for survivors to truly be able to access justice and for the systems to be such that they enable people to feel safer and feel like they can take action and that they will be supported. So thank you so much for a brilliant panel. Thank you.